Good afternoon and welcome to this live television talk show. I am Rita Kanyo and I'll be your moderator this afternoon. Now the conversation continues from last week into this week, taking a look at how we can all together rise to end violence against women and girls in our country. Now in particular focus this afternoon, we take a look at a movement, what it means for us to come together and what we can do. And when we talk about the movement, it's aside from tribe, age, gender, religion, all those are put aside, and we say, how can we all come together and end this violence against girls and women within our country? As the numbers continue to rise, even during the post-COVID-19 pandemic, we don't know what the numbers might be like, but at this point, what the numbers reveal is also quite worrying, and even before the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, joining me to have this conversation, I am joined at my extreme left by Dora Chichoncho Musingu, who's the Executive Director of Uganet. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Next to her is Beatrice Ajonyo, who is the Project Manager at ICWEA. Welcome.
Thank you.
And this time around, joining us is a gentleman, Dr. Dan Byamukama, who is Head of HIV Prevention at the Uganda AIDS Commission. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, of course, when we said Dr. Dan, the conversation that we had last week was only hinged on a conversation about male engagement, but we did not have a male participant. And we had a call that said we need to bring the men in. Of course, he's going to be coming to talking about policy, but he's also here as a man, I believe.
Thank you.
Now, just starting us off, when I mentioned that we'd be having a look at the movement, what we can all come together and do to end the violence against women and girls, what are you wondering? What is this movement? How am I even a part of it? How am I concerned? Let's start right there, and I'll start with you, Dora. Dora, what do you think of a movement? When you hear a movement coming together to end violence against women and girls, what comes to your mind?
Thank you very much. This is a very, very important conversation, and the reason that we come into this space, the reason we want to speak to our viewers and listeners is that we want everybody coming to join hands with us who are on this side to say, let's come together and end violence against women. People care out there. If you see the numbers that we've been talking about, they are really huge numbers. And this time round, most people in the community have been engaged. Media houses have been reporting. We were just analyzing how much has been covered on this issue of violence against women in just 3 months. Every media house covered over 5 stories. So meaning that out there, the community cares that we really end violence against women. It is just that we are speaking sometimes in different corners. We are coming in from different perspectives. Sometimes our messages are not as coordinated. This time thinking of a movement is to say, let's come together under one umbrella. Let the men come and join this fight. Let religious, different people of religious faith come and we join this fight. Let the private sector join this fight. Let's try to speak together to fight violence against women. So the understanding is that it is a huge wave that is causing this injustice. And for any huge wave to be pushed aside, there has to be an equal amount of effort of people speaking and of people pushing. So imagine the church says, yes, we care for peace. Imagine political leaders say, yes, we care for good governance, we care that people are well. All rights advocates, all universities, the private sector said we care for violence against women, we would see a change. We would stand against the very many people that are making our communities less peaceful, the people that are being maimed. I know we earlier talked about the numbers, but if just today, according to what the different newsrooms are reporting, we could be having 10,000 girls who will not report to school on Monday when school opens. If the whole school were to open from all levels of learning, about 10,000 girls from different levels would not go to school. By the end of May, 5,538 cases had been reported of violence against women, older women and younger girls. So that is just GBV. But then teenage pregnancies, defilements, elopements are at a tune of 10,000. these numbers are so huge. So to make any change and create real conversation and real impact, it won't be small organizations that we represent here. It won't be NGOs. It won't be the health sector, the gender sector. It's going to take every Ugandan. It's going to take people from every corner coming together for us to make a difference. And that's why we are here. That's why this conversation is important, and that's why we're inviting everybody to take part and come join us. Later on, Beatrice will be letting us know how ICW is rallying us and how whoever is interested out there can be part of what is going on.
Yes, and that's when we bring in you, Beatrice, the conversation in terms of movement. You are, yes, it's an institution, you represent ICWEA this afternoon, and like Dora has touched on, you will be telling us what you're doing. But when it comes to you as an individual, if you were detached from ICWEA, when you hear of movement, what should someone be thinking of when it comes to ending violence against women and girls?
Movement when it comes to ending violence against women and girls. My school of thought tells me that for starters, it is about not just an individual. What touches Dora, what touches Rita, what touches Dan, in one way or the other, we have that interconnectedness. So regardless of who is being affected at a particular time, in the long run, we are all affected. So when it comes to responding or acting or coming to act, movement building looks at, put aside it being an issue of Dr. Dan, put aside it being an issue of Rita, but what can Rita, Dr. Dan, Beatrice, and Dora do to come together and fight the vice? So, and while we come together, we bear in mind that it is the person that is at the center. So person-centeredness is key to movement building. So we come together as individuals, but then at the end of the day, we are this big, one big family. Yeah.
Okay, we'll bring you in from the male perspective, Dr. Dan, and I see you taking in notes as Beatrice and Dora were mentioning a few things when it comes to the movement. What are your thoughts on the movement?
The movement, thank you for the question. The movement, I'm thinking about engagement. Engaging all concerned.
Yes.
Not leaving it to the voices of the few. Everybody should be rallied to know that this is a priority. It's an issue worth worth its importance, and everybody should come on board. I'm talking about, when I think of movement, I'm thinking about commitment. Often we have come up with causes where people give half-baked effort.
Yes.
This is not an issue to give half-baked effort. It is, you're committed, you're giving all. It is worth all our efforts. A movement, I'm thinking about action and momentum. We have been doing some work as government trying to address the issue of violence against women and girls. But as civil society have always pointed to us, the momentum is not enough. We are doing, like the problem is not big. So we need to give it momentum, put it among the priority level where it belongs. And I think together, when we have various commons, including others I've not talked about, we have what we call a movement, and we are marching to have this cleared. That's my interpretation of the movement. Yeah.
Okay. Well, Dr. Dan, you mentioned something, and that is taking the momentum that Dora brought in. And I think one of the things we need to take a look at is where are the gaps. A number of times, if you're going to take a look at an issue, it's not, okay, yes, the problem is there, but how do we solve it? So where are the gaps, Dora, when it comes to just a look at how the fight, yes, with government, maybe it might be policy, maybe also be on individual level, but where are the gaps when it comes to this movement in particular?
Just exactly what Dr. Dan has said, that we have not lost our peace enough on this issue. We have not prioritized it enough at our different levels. At the level, right from the level of government, duty bearers, individuals, households, civil society, we need to be more angry than we are. We need to take a stand in a more broader or bigger way than we have, because clearly we are concerned, everybody's concerned. I'm sure a leader, duty bearers out there are concerned, but we need to be a little more decisive on ending violence against women, not as individuals, not as organizations, not as one department of government, but cross-cutting. You know, there's that whole time when, you know, you're seated in boardrooms and we are discussing gender as a mainstreaming factor. And I believe every part of government, any department, any agency will have gender being mainstreamed, and they want to see how women and men are given equal opportunities. And by that whole analogy of gender being mainstreamed is the understanding that the two genders are not equal, and there has to be some balancing act, and there has to be opportunities, there has to be power given to one gender to give them an opportunity to be on the table. But we say the rhetoric and we don't do as much. And for me, I think when we come together as a movement, when that dream and vision of all actors driving in one direction, all agencies driving in one direction come, we will be able to give this the momentum, the impetus that it deserves. So violence against women really is not a simple problem. It's been here since time immemorial. It grows and thrives because our cultures and our context have allowed it to happen. You know, and the root cause of violence against women it's just how society is created to value one gender over the other. The power between men and women is not the same. That is why the defiled, the molested is in in the highest cases are the women and the girls. So to be able to undo what has been historically the norm, the level of leadership and voices and hands and policies and leaders, the amount needed is a lot more than is being provided and or should be provided. So that gap of analysis, what is the problem, what is the root cause, who is caring, who is driving, is very, very important. Yeah.
Well, when Beatrice, when Dora mentions that gap of analysis, as ICWEA, you have gone across the country. As a project coordinator, you have interacted with these communities where this is happening. Talk about the analysis bit, that gap, what you see.
As ICWEA, as we move around the country, not just doing the tackling issues of gender or gender-based violence, but also looking at issues that matter to the lives of women living with HIV. Dora mentions gender mainstreaming, and I would like to say that from our interactions within the community, within the health facility settings, one of our discoveries is that yes, in principle and policy, gender mainstreaming is an approach that has been taken by the government of Uganda, and we do appreciate it. However, when it comes to the actual implementation, Dr. Dan will tell you that when it comes to HIV at Uganda AIDS Commission, we have adopted a multi-sectoral approach to dealing with the HIV response. And he will also tell you that within the HIV strategic plan, issues of gender are very critical, and there's a whole chapter about gender and how we should respond to gender. And that tells us that when we come to the health facility setting, it is expected that there are specific issues, specific interventions and approaches that are actually employed in terms of handling issues of gender-based violence or issues of domestic violence and issues related to any form of violence within that particular setting. But then the approach is actually lacking in the sense that the multi-stakeholders that we are talking about are working in silos. So you find that at the facility setting, probably someone who would be an expert in gender, training health workers in gender issues and how to actually handle the specific needs and interests of women living with HIV, girls living with HIV, is lacking. And in the long run, just because there's that gap in terms of having expertise in gender issues, then at the end of the day, the client actually ends up suffering further. Probably the health worker, due to lack of that expertise, infringes more on certain human rights, or even actually is compelled to act on GBV, create more GBV against the client. Other than the working in silence, from a community point of view, gender issues have, I would say, have not been given the priority that Dora has talked about in terms of response, in terms of financing, in terms of, yeah, so, and it becomes very difficult to actually sustain the programs. So that is what I would basically say in relation to your question.
All right. Dr. Dan, what is your response to what Beatrice and Dora have mentioned?
Of course, they say a couple things which are obvious and accurate, would not contradict. But as government, we are, our National Development Plan, which is the main driving document, plan for government, categorically identifies violence against women and girls as a key development issue. And orders, instructs all sectors to put in place measures to address the vice. And on that side, we are pleased, of course, as much as civil society colleagues are there to monitor, to make sure they tell us where we are not doing enough, which we appreciate. On part of leadership, if we have the #1 person really calling this a vice, then it is a vice. And to such an extent, we are proud of him, because clearly violence against women and girls, the head of state condemns it. So it's not, it has, the movement that we are starting has support, I think, from the highest level. But the challenge you have had, as my colleagues have pointed out, #1 has been on the issue of resource allocation. And when you look at resource allocation, of course, the underlying factor that determines resource allocation is, one of them is data. Do we have enough information to contextualize the problem? Are policymakers, the members of parliament, conversant with the idea, the damage violence against women does, not just to individuals, but to whole communities, to whole economies? Are members of parliament and other key policymakers aware of the extent of the problem? So I see one of the major gaps there has been lack of comprehensive information, to put it in front of people and show them that actually violence against women is not just a slap. It's not just raping somebody and he goes away. It has terrible long-term consequences. And if those consequences are well quantified, the number of girls coming to hospitals because they have been raped, the number of girls coming to hospital because who are pregnant because they have been raped. If such information was well captured and put to the country, to communities, but most especially to policymakers, maybe you would be having a movement. We will not be pushing for it. So as we push for this movement, we must not forget to push for proper documentation, proper data collection to quantify the problem, so that we win more people, especially on the political side, policymakers, to be part of this movement.
Well, Doctor, when you mentioned comprehensive information and the fact that there's a lack thereof of it when it comes to violence against women and girls, so then who should we put the responsibility on in this particular movement to say, we need you to compile this information? Because at this point, if I should, perhaps is police, then that keeps giving us a report, this is what we have received, these are cases, and perhaps Dora will come in later to also answer the very same question.
As my colleagues have pointed out, a violence against women and girls response must be a multi-sector response. If you look at how various sectors have a role, and that's how it's designed in our National Development Plan. The health sector has a key role. According to us, violence against women and girls is a public health problem. So the health sector should have some plan, some data collected in that area. But if you look at the health sector, for example, 50% of the health service delivery in the country is offered in private health facilities. When somebody gets raped or beaten, he will go with his cat to the nearest clinic, They switch her, and she goes back home. That information from the Kairos Medical Center in, I don't know, it's in Machinde, is never corrected to show the country that actually in one night on Christmas Eve, the accurate picture of women who were beaten by their drunk husband is this big. If that system was put in place, so to some extent, civil society is right, it's our mandate. We should be putting effort to collect all this data, to portray the accurate picture of violence against women. The problem it is, right now we are not putting so much effort in that area. We are not putting in enough resources to collect that information, and the problem is not portrayed as it actually is. If you go to police, the justice and law sector, they have their mandate. They have to contribute to addressing some of them. But are they collecting accurate data? Is that data available to influence policymakers to give this problem of violence against women and children the priority it deserves? Right now, it is not getting the priority it deserves, partly because there's not enough data. So I think I welcome the momentum created by civil society to push government to create, make it a movement, correct accurate data, and we will reveal that actually violence against women is a high priority problem of a higher rank than most of these other issues we give high priority. So I think with that, we shall have the tools to advocate. If you look at a program, the HIV response, most of the leaders in the communities are conversant, stand up and talk about HIV. But most of the leaders are not conversant with talking about advocating for ending violence against. Number one, they don't have the information. We have not packaged this information, disseminated it to the leaders so that they are armed to advocate to. So there are several challenges, of course, other challenges which I will leave my colleagues talk about, like Dora already talked about the way our culture, how we are organized as community, our social culture setup. There are several initiatives by government to try and challenge the cultures we have come to accept as society, which propagate violence against women. We agree violence against women and girls is unacceptable. Recently, I engaged a group of men and I asked them, if you came home and you find your daughter has been raped by somebody who works for you, what would you do? Almost all of them gave me an answer which I cannot repeat on air. So now my question was them, if that is what you would do to somebody who has raped your daughter, why do you rape other people's daughters then? And they just burst into laughter, that kind of thing. But really nobody wants violence against women. But we need to mobilize the data, create the movement so that everybody is armed with information, the extent of the problem, how it presents, and they will be able to talk about it, just like they freely talk about HIV, they freely talk about other issues. Really.
Okay. Well, Dara, bringing you to the conversation, when Dr. Dan mentions the lack of comprehensive information, and also tying it into the social norms, which you had mentioned earlier, by taking a look at the beginning of the week, there was a report that showed that the hugest number of defilement cases, the perpetrators are the fathers of these girls. These are people who stay at home with these girls. This is a father figure. And taking into consideration that, you know, the health worker perhaps who might deal with this child eventually, the right questions being asked, who did this to you? Are you safe at home? Putting those two into consideration.
Yeah, it's just quite unfortunate that indeed this is what we are dealing with. And your question is asking who is counting, who is asking these questions, who is holding one to account. Yeah, so many things that we need to be creating better championship. Just exactly what Doctor has said, at all different levels, such that if there is greater championship at a national level, even that health worker or nurse who will intervene will be knowing that this is an issue that is going to be held seriously. If we have more energies directed in the response work of saving the girls who get violated and abused, then at the level of police, when a police goes to investigate, there will be no question of how much money are you paying me to remain silent? Right, such very indecent acts which are created with a lot of impunity are everywhere, but they don't come to the fore. These are the cases you hear that the file has disappeared, the case has died somewhere, just because the people who are controlling the space are the people who don't care to see what happens to the problem. So really violence against women is about power imbalance. And power imbalance is at every level. Who controls that system? Who cares to see the change at the system level? So even if the responders at grassroots level would have all intention to get such fathers, you know, picked out, they will try as medical responders. They will be failed at the justice level, at the police investigation. Every day we know that it's a norm. People say that if you have money, you'll be out of the justice system. You'll control the file. You'll control, you know, who finally handles this matter. So there is a lot that needs to get coordinated. There is a mindset that needs to happen, yes, we need the data and we are pushing for it. Actually, the voices that are behind this conversation are so many voices. The women of this country, the women organizations, the women's rights groups, we share the conversation we have here is shared by many champions out there. But until we get this championship happen at all levels of our community, we will not be going very far. And that's why this conversation is very, very important. Number one, we need to prevent it before it happens. Once the violence has happened, we need to respond effectively. So that nurse, the police officer, the supportive network of this young person, the rebuilding of a mind that, yes, I was abused as a child, but I can have a future and raise up as a girl and raise up as a woman and be effective as a leader. That, you see, it is momentum that we need to pick and sustain. It's momentum that needs real life breathed into it. And that's the question we are interrogating as our community here. We need to change things for good. We need to change things for the long haul. So conversations here are not just conversations to happen. We are dealing with the cancer. We are dealing with a very, very serious problem. So until there is a huge push, a wave that is equivalent to the vices that we see, we will keep lamenting about the fathers that rape their girls and defile their girls, and we don't see the equal amount of efforts that are coming against them.
Okay. Beatrice, any remarks on the comprehensive information?
It is indeed, it's a very big problem. And I beg to concur with Dr. Dan. And the information, it doesn't require someone to actually do a study to get this information.
What does it require?
But it requires that, but even there are other avenues of getting this information. And from our engagements with the communities and even at site level, I will say that from experience, or from ICWEA's experience, it has done a number of assessments in order to ascertain the status of service delivery. So when it comes to the gap in relation to the data that Dr. Dan is alluding to, we have found out that actually most of these cases are never reported. And the few that are reported, documentation is very, very poor. So you find someone has come to a facility and has reported a GBV case, but the facility itself does not actually have the tools that it requires to record these cases. So other than doing that, the studies and the researches to come up with this data, our everyday programs and service delivery data would be sufficient, but then when it comes to having that data available, we still have a certain gap in there. And also, this is to say that just as my colleague Dora has alluded, bringing these cases before the concerned takes not an effort of just the individual, but also the other people that have been approached. Last week, I did mention on this same platform that in one particular district where we have been present, it was discovered that from the communities that suffer the GBV themselves, that they are actually aware that GBV is happening. They know where to report. They know who to hold accountable. They know where to seek for support. But the willingness to report these cases is very low. Knowledge about all these issues is at 80%. Willingness to report is at 20%. And this tells us that how prepared and empowered is that woman, that girl, to fend for herself. So it tells the movement that there is need to actually to identify the person-centeredness that I was talking about, to identify that particular individual, empower the individual to be able to speak out. And when you speak out, then the police, Dr. Dan, Dora and myself can be able to record and report.
Okay. Well, Dr. Dan, to bring you in, they say that the journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. Yes, we are at a point where the comprehensive information is lacking here and there, but the efforts have already started. Even with the Uganda AIDS Commission, there's a time where they had to start from somewhere with this fight against HIV and AIDS. We know where we stand as a country. The numbers, when we take a look at violence against women and girls, is only going higher. Where do we start as we wait for this information?
We have already started. We have already started, as I put it to you in my first remarks. The National Development Plan clearly identifies this as a problem. Violence against women is totally unacceptable, and it gives guidance on what sectors should do. We need to address this as government. But for it to be a movement, to get everybody in the community really talking about that, I think the data we have to put it before people. See, if it's a monster and you really have shade, some people cannot easily see the monster if the picture is not clear.
Yes.
We need data that puts this picture clearly out there. The economic, when a person gets raped, the consequences on that person is beyond simple pain and contracting an STD. Some of them get traumatized for the rest of their life. The young girl who used to perform very well in primary school eventually changes. It's no longer, it disappears, she disappears. So that is the pain. Some people are living with the pain, and we don't have the services to help women who have been raped, and they are dealing with that baggage, with the shame and pain for a long time. A person living like that cannot perform fully at the workplace. So the consequences of rape, of violence against women, are not well quantified. To calculate and show people that when a girl is raped, she may walk away, she may look normal, but inside she's hurting. And she's hurting for the rest of her life. The consequence of that on her performance, on her ability to relate, ability to raise normal children, as we continue to discuss, you will cover, we must share with our people that actually violence against women appears to be self-propagating. A girl who was violated is most likely going to raise a son who will violate other people.
That's true.
A girl who saw her mother being beaten is most likely going to get married in an arrangement that she will accept being beaten. Or the boy who saw her mother being beaten. So if somebody was to sit down and quantify exactly, not just the number of how many have been beaten, but show us the economic implication of one girl who has been beaten, who has been raped. How much does it cost her? How much does it reduce her potential? Then more parents, there is a hopeless men who rape their own daughters. Maybe they may think in the long term, but I don't feel the data is already enough to portray a picture so that we get a movement, because the ending of violence against women, it is not going to be business as usual. Otherwise, we shall just keep on rubbing the edges. It has to be a movement, and the movement, we must put the facts in the eyes of everybody to make them angry, so that we are ready to do business.
Okay.
The business ending violence against women requires.
Well, when Dora mentioned earlier that, you know, in the media you've seen a number of stories that have been reported, in one way or another, we may not have the comprehensive information, but we know that at least in a week, maybe this is reported here in different parts of the country. Even when you read the New Vision, maybe the Daily Monitor, different outlets have these things being reported in different places. Dora, messaging. Yes, the media has put out, but messaging of what we are dealing with. What do you see the movement changing? What should change in the messaging?
I think the spirit of our conversation today is that it is very urgent. If anything needs to be done, it needs to be done today. And if any action needs to be harnessed in one position, it cannot wait for tomorrow. Because if every other day there is 100 girls in Kotido have reported, you know, cases, then there's 500 here, then there's 600 there. These are lives of people that need to be salvaged. So I think that the key message around ending violence against women is that it is urgent. It is urgent at different fora, at different levels, right from the grassroots. And we need to start now. And I think the other key urgent message, the other message is that it takes everyone. It takes everybody to do something about ending violence against women. In our space, we actually say that everybody has the power to do something to end violence against women.
When you say everybody, a number of times people say, what should I do? One, I don't have a neighbor, maybe I don't know anyone who's, but what can I, who maybe is far removed from this, so they think mentally, what can they do?
Different things that they can do. Number one, violence against women is everywhere. It is everywhere. It is taking very many forms. So unless a person is not intentionally watching and looking out, they will not see it. But if you really want to see everywhere, we are surrounded by the demeaning of a particular gender. Women every day, the young girls every day are being put under the table. They are being abused. It is as what we witness every day with the cyberbullying on WhatsApp, on Facebook, and all these videos of wife beating, girl beating, abusing is smeared on the social media. It is what you see in the neighborhood when a girl or a boy is being beaten. It is the, you know how we share these videos from WhatsApp to WhatsApp, and you know they've been going all around, and you see people laughing and taking interest in a particular person being, you know, beaten very seriously, and it shares, and one person shares from one group to another, and people seem to enjoy that conversation. So there is so much that can be done. Your question, what can people do? Speak against it and take a stand. So we cannot be sharing and encouraging the conversation or taking interest in people being beaten, in a woman, in a girl being beaten. Simple things as, you know, harassment cases that happen in the workplace, you know, because it is this shaming, it is, you know, keep quiet, that makes this vice grow, because not many want to hit it on their head. So what COVID has done is actually unmask what has been in our communities, in our homes, in our households, but probably we had taken peace with it, and in a way we were not giving it much attention. But because so many people died, so many people were harmed, because everybody everywhere was reporting, we now feel the heat. But this violence and the high rates of the violence has been going on time immemorial. But it will take everybody at all levels of government, at all levels of the community. Media has done its part. Can the faith organizations, faith-based groups, right from the Islamic faith to the Catholic faith to the Pentecostal faith, could we have pastors put on sackcloths? Because you see, we've been pushing for our interest on things that indeed touch us. But could we all say we are mourning, we are putting candlelights for the many women that have died within this COVID period? When we talk about 10,000 girls who have been raped and defiled and won't go to school, we are talking about 3-4 universities. 10,000, a population of 10,000 is not small. And this is just from the different reports of police, the Sauti phone call, the system of Ministry of Gender recording, and then what some media houses have used their bureaus to counteract. Because there is a day, Daily Monitor did a story of 2,300 girls are experiencing cases of defilement, teenage pregnancies, early marriages, you know. When hunger beat so hard, you could marry off a girl with a sack, a basin of cassava. You see? So if this is what our communities are going through, who should cause the heat to make them account, you know? What is an LC leader at that level saying? What is a church preaching? Who is speaking on the radio waves? We have FMs everywhere. You see, so when we say everybody has the power, I'll use my forum, I'll use my forum as a speaker, you know, of a particular women's group. I'll use my forum as a mother and in charge of my household of 10 or 15. I'll use my forum on a WhatsApp group that I have. I will speak out on that seat in the office when there is harassment of a particular gender. So there are different opportunities everywhere. Simple groups. Having a conversation in a bar. If you really care and you're a man and you really want to challenge us, as Doctor has challenged, but who is raping and defiling the girls? It is the boys. It is the boys. And sometimes there is this conversation of like, don't shame the boys and the men. It's not about the men. Actually, these days, women are more violent and women are going... There's that whole conversation of like, it's not about women. Even men are vulnerable. But let's face it. It is the girls that are pregnant. Yes. It is the girls that have been beaten. So actually, in our space, we don't just say it's gender-based violence. It is violence against women. It is women that are being treated, are being abused. It is women, it is the younger girls that cannot go to school. It is the women that are maimed, and at different levels. Even if you're a professional, even if you're a rich woman, even if you're just a young girl, even if you're a girl of 3 years, so long as you're in this gender of F, you are abused and you are vulnerable. You see, so it will take all of us to really question and interrogate why, and then we go to the how. And so by us inviting all well-wishers, people who care, people who are interested, people who want to change things even at their levels, let's understand the why. It is because women are always, culturally, traditionally, it's okay. You know, a woman is beaten and it is not an issue. They'll just laugh about it. And that's what needs to stop. Yeah.
Beatrice, any remarks you would like to add to what Dora has mentioned when it comes to messaging and who and how I can be a part of this movement?
Oh, thank you, Rita. And I am overwhelmed with joy with what Dora has said. And I just want to add that I want to come from a different perspective from where Dora is coming from. And in addition to having everybody, like she has said, I want to just speak to specific, as a woman, the vulnerability index is this big. And because the vulnerability index is this big, that means you are prone to so many forms of violence and which impact you in various ways. And speaking from the perspective of a woman living with HIV, I would say, in addition to the many people we need, I want to speak to our policymakers. When we look at the discourse of HIV, there are particular structural issues that actually put this woman in a position where she is exposed to various forms of violence. And I'll cite a few examples. We are having certain policies like, let me say, when it comes to service delivery, we have certain policies like the assisted partner notification, which require that if any person goes for a HIV test, you're supposed to actually elicit your partners so that they are also actually tested. But then when it comes to the actual, the way the service is actually rendered, there are certain, I don't know how I should call it, but certain steps may be missed, and these steps actually put women living with HIV at high risk of violence from their partners.
What are those steps? Oh,
say for example, I have the right to informed consent, and therefore be informed the reason as to why my partner is being enlisted. And then after it is done, many times women find that discomfort in terms of disclosing their sexual partners, or probably having the confidence of going back to tell their partners, you know what, I did a HIV test and I'm HIV positive. So it comes back to that fear. So many times in terms of the acceptance rate, it is really not that high. So you find that many times because the protocols are so long, some of these protocols are skipped because someone has to get enrolled on treatment, and in the long run you find that because of skipping some of the protocols, this woman is put at the risk of GBV. And so why do I point out issues of policy? I just want to appeal that the message, like Dora said, is that we need that we need the safety, we need the protection, and what other better way than being protected by actually an existing document, an existing living something that is written and is speaking towards it.
Well, when you mention policy, it also goes back to the policymaker. Yeah. And we can never remove the fact that the policymaker is a citizen, is an individual that Dora has mentioned, an individual that you have mentioned. And Dr. Dan, just to bring you back into this conversation, if you have an individual who, before they're even a policymaker, is aware, yes, you mentioned that maybe we might have members of parliament who need to have this information, this comprehensive information. But this individual who is a member of parliament is listening to the message that is going out. And maybe they don't need to wait for the information, but they need to come around to the fact that this is happening in society. I can do something, and perhaps I can do something from my position. And when Dora was saying, speak out, say something, policymakers coming out also first say, I am an individual, I have heard of these things, I am a citizen. How those two are related.
Thank you. Everybody has, before they have even become a policymaker, they are members of a community, and they have a duty to this movement. As I pointed out earlier, nobody likes their wife, their child being violated. But there is also a challenge that most people, if you have interacted with a community, most people are not equipped with accurate information to quantify the problem. You see, the culture has accepted that when you beat a girl, when you beat your wife, it's just a slap. But people are not able. It's just a few members of the community who are able to analyze beyond the obvious slap, that this slap has consequences 1, 2, and 3, and 4. So I think as we build this movement, being prodded by civil society, there has to be an element of capacity building. The people, we have champions who talk about HIV. Initially, they did not have enough information to easily make a case against HIV in the communities. Equally, I notice that why violence against women is still so over the place is that people don't see it beyond a slap. But if people are equipped with accurate information, number two, if people know what do we need to do to prevent it. So many people, as Dora said, are aware in their neighborhood that somebody is being beaten. But beyond knowing and waiting to save her from being killed, they do not know what to tell this person, what steps, what services are available for you. So I think as this movement is being built, which I support and we support as the Uganda AIDS Commission, as the National HIV Response, because as a National HIV Response, we believe our goal is to end AIDS by 2030. We don't want any more infections. But provided there is still ongoing violence against girls and women, it is still condoned, we know that the dream is not going to be realized. So we are behind the movement to end violence against women, but we know it has to come with some capacity building. Let's give our religious leaders the punching points a few are able to really analyze the problem beyond a simple slap, but most are not able. So we must go an extra mile, and that calls for resources. Let's put more resources in building a movement, building a military, religious leaders, cultural leaders, political leaders. They can easily talk about malaria, but tell them that violence against women is a problem, analyze it for the people in the meeting. They will not analyze it. We would want the media. I have seen the media people. You have a role to play. I've seen them come to me very many times to ask me about the statistics about HIV, how many died last year, but nobody has ever asked me about it. So you must put it at the forefront as you invite people to host in talk shows. Consider violence against women as a serious vice with great consequences. In my own estimation, if it is quantified, it has greater negative consequences than most of the things we talk about here. So the media come forward. We should, as government and as policymakers, come up, of course, build capacity, have an army that is able to teach the people, give the people the words to use to condemn. People don't know. They are used to laughing, as Dora said. When they see a woman being beaten in a video clip, they laugh and forward. But we must change the language of the people. We must change the whole culture, and that means introducing new words. Must give the people new words to use, new words to condemn, and that in itself in the long run will change the culture and the attitudes of the people. Because we must change the people from the grassroots, so that violence against women is unacceptable. It's not a laughing matter.
Well, when you mentioned capacity building, we also take a look at the policies and the laws. And last week when we had the conversation, there were a few areas that were highlighted that are lacking when it comes to the fight against ending violence against women and girls. Yeah. Just talking about the laws.
Yeah.
Do you believe that there needs to be a change there?
In the laws?
Yes.
I think Dora is a lawyer. She's better qualified to
No,
answer
but
that.
from yours, you mentioned the fact that, yes,
So
look at
me
policies.
as a doctor, I will start from that angle. I request Dora to talk about the laws. But I see so many opportunities from the perspective of a health worker to address violence against women, which are not exploited. I have been in school. I see so many opportunities for a teacher to identify a child who is already being threatened at home, who is being assaulted and abused. A teacher is in a position, if the capacity is built, to save a 6-year-old who has an uncle in the house that is sneaking on her. She can easily identify it, but the capacity is not built. And I think the environment is not supportive for that teacher to say, okay, I think the 6-year-old girl in my class, she's having a problem. Let's tackle it. Where do you take it when you start it? So the environment is not supportive, but most teachers don't have the capacity, for example. I've given an example in the health sector. A woman will come with a cracked head, you suture and give her Panadol and dress the head and send her back home. But there are so many numerous opportunities to put an end to violence against women there and then. We don't have the resources to do that, but even the training, the basic formational training does not prepare a health worker to address violence against women as a worthy public health problem. So even from training, we need to engage training schools so that the people are trained to see violence against women as a public health problem that is. Come up with innovation. Tell people, what do you need to do when you see one? Don't just let it pass. There are so many opportunities that are being missed right now. And I'm very sure with the laws, as I already requested, let Dora tell us about the laws. What gaps are there? Yes. Is the police officer who is entrusted? Because quite often we are counting on the police officer to be at the forefront of addressing this violence against women. But I see so many limitations with the police officer there. Police officer has so many responsibilities, but he's given training for 6 months. He's expected to know everything about the law, health perspective, to know so many things in 6 months. I think it's quite challenging. So there is a need for continuous capacity building. But for this particular problem of violence against women, it is worth the effort that we should bring people on board, build their capacity, create an army. Otherwise, it will be business as usual. If this is a movement which I think is timely, which I think is needed, we need an army. Okay. It will involve capacity building.
Well, when you say that question of the laws should be directed to Dora, I also want you to know, on the issue of the laws, we had the conversation last week, but also to bring in, earlier on at the beginning, you said, as a country, we are not angry enough. We're not angry enough about what's happening, about the statistics that we continue to hear about, we continue to read about, and a number of times they say, you say, oh my God, but you just simply move on. How angry should one be, and then how do we take a look at how those laws can change to actually in one way or another reflect the anger that we have as Ugandans against what is happening to the girls and women in our country?
Okay. So thank you very much, and thanks again to the conversation of movement building, because there's been a movement. We are asking to be emboldened and be more, but like I said earlier, there are women organizations that have been pushing. And they pushed in 2011, and a law was passed called the Domestic Violence Act. That law has a level of anger that you can read into it, because it tried to change a few more things that are not done normally. For example, it gave powers to local council courts to deal with cases of violence against women. It actually went to an extent of saying that these courts should even sit on a Saturday. These courts can even sit, any case that is reported to such lower courts, LC1 at the level of magistrate, it should not take a week to handle this matter. These issues of, like I reported, then it takes forever for my case to be heard. So you could see that the anger and the urgency was being depicted at that time of the lawmaking process, and the women movement engaged, and the more actors spoke and Parliament heard, and this law was passed. It's been already 10 years when this law was passed. There's been a study that actually indicates that there's been a little bit of progress in terms of the law being like an advocacy tool, because all those were to enable the conversations of you can report. When you report, there is support, and it is both a civil matter and both and also a criminal matter. So at all angles, you could get some bit of support. If the evidence has died and you cannot really make it in a criminal court, that local council court should listen and give some level of compensation, some level of action to really contribute to dealing with violence at the lowest level of households. But that has also left lots of gaps, because being a law that was going to operate nationally, the level of punishments that were put in there were small. Simple things as an apology. Well, there is a context where an apology would be sufficient, but the punishment given in that law of violence against women is not more. It's a punishment not more than 2 years. Yet we see that sometimes the abuses that people go through have to be much more, a punishment much more than 2 years. We have seen the heinous crimes, the crimes that you see that this was committed with impunity. Let's talk about parents, you know, a father who defiles a daughter. That ceases to be just violence against this person. It is a capital offense, which is a matter of incest, defilement, and that needs to be really punished maybe for 20 years in prison and not just 2 years. So along the way, we've seen some kind of challenges with implementation. The championship has been very little. The funds for this law to work have been very little. There are courts you go to, police courts you go to, and you ask, have you any knowledge in regard to the Domestic Violence Act of 2011, they will tell you we don't know this Domestic Violence Act. So that speaks to the efforts that start rolling out and don't receive enough support from the different levels, especially of government. Because when we talk about laws, then we have actually removed it mostly from everyday conversation of everybody to systems, to government, to levels of implementation that need staff, that need money, that need monitoring, that need supervision, and that is where there needs to be a lot more. But also, it is not just one law that encompasses this conversation, because from the start we say that violence against women, or domestic violence, or gender-based violence, whichever name we give it, is broad. It happens in many ways. It is sexual violence, it is psychological, it is physical violence of beating, it is the emotional. So it is all these 6 forms of violence, and they are punished in different codes of the law. The criminal code will punish the sexual violence, the assaults, the rapes, the defilement. The law is sufficient. In terms of is the law weak or not strong enough, the law is there. And even the 2-year punishment under the Domestic Violence Act could be strengthened with another higher punishment in the criminal code. So it is not the lack of laws to punish. It is not the lack of guidance on what is a crime and what is not a crime. It is the implementation. It is the whole conversation we had around a championship of an issue. We wish that we would be angry enough the way we have tried to be angry, let's say, around corruption. I know we still struggle, and really struggle a lot more on corruption, but we saw a bit of championship at some point. There is also that question, are we paying it just lip service, or are we doing enough? But there are causes. You really see that there is effort to stop, reflect, and do differently. COVID has been a life-threatening issue. We saw great leadership at the level of government, and government rallied for the support of communities. I want to tell you that yes, COVID is terrible. COVID can spread like a wildfire. But if anybody cared to count the impact of violence in homes, how COVID has turned out to be a girls' crisis, if anybody cared to count, they would see that it is as bad, as terrible, or in some cases, even worse. So if we could stop and get into lockdown and really want to save lives, I am not saying that they are the same in terms of the effect of every day and how it has ravaged lives and the impact of how it could be if we had not stopped. We had to stop. It was imperative, it was needed, it was important. But you see, the effect of how it affected households and women and younger girls has not gotten the importance as like it deserves. Even when we saw from the leadership of His Excellency the President, yes, he was informed, and we expected to see a little more the lion in him coming to say women should not die at the levels they are dying, being attacked, being hospitalized. Let us see stronger leadership at that level. Let the ministry come out. We need to see the Ministry of Gender. It has tried, it's been present. We want to see the ministers of the gender ministry come up and rally a campaign. Let the girls, and we are really grateful to the Ministry of Education who have allowed girls who are pregnant to go to school, because it is important. There should have been a gatekeeper that reduced the cases of teenage pregnancies and early marriages and forced marriages. The hunger people experienced in lockdown shouldn't have caused the girls to be pregnant, and then that should close off an opportunity for girls to go to school. I hope it is not just a policy which will be mentioned at a higher level and not implemented by schools. I hope somebody monitors the schools that are going to allow the girls that have been impregnated to have an opportunity to go back to school and write their exams and get an opportunity to have a better future. So we need to have this coordinated conversation and address it with the emergency that it deserves. The laws, the policy seem to be in place. But because this is an issue that is of a social construct, it is about biases, it is about what people feel and think and know. So it is probably calling for more information giving, like we have said. People need the right information. It is about mindset change that brings in everybody at different level. It is about interagency dialogue and working together. So if Ministry of Education has said that girls can study, is the community development system under Ministry of Gender going to enable that? Are the church-based groups going to not preach against it, such that girls are given a chance to go to school? is there going to be a framework that enables this to happen? Can the hospitals that are going to be doing these deliveries not judge the girls? Let them have a place where they can actually go for HIV testing, STI testing. Can children be allowed to deliver those who were pregnant, such that we reduce the fistulas? Violence harms lives very significantly, causes deaths, and at each level there has to be a gatekeeper who says, I care and I'm going to stop this to happen. So yes, the laws exist, but the practices, the attitudes, the beliefs, the leaders are all the people that cause an enabling environment that gives power that gives power to the laws and to the policies. Why, you know, speak so much about it, but the police is not enabled to investigate, or the police is not monitored when we say that the cases disappear, the cases die. Let there be a level of monitoring that allows cases not to die, cases not to disappear in thin air. The police is trying, actually the Uganda Police Force is putting a lot of measures in place, but they need to be supported, they need to be held accountable such that it is continuous, it's not momentous, and we continue to see how changes are happening in that field.
Okay, well, thank you, Dora. Now we're going to be taking a short break, but the conversation continues about how we can create a movement together. We can rise to end violence against women and girls. When we return, we'll be having a conversation about, one, we've mentioned the individual, but also the organizations that come up from a number of individuals that come up under an organization. What are they doing and how can we help? For now, we'll be coming right back. The conversation around how we can all come together in terms of a movement to end violence against women and girls continues here on NTV. And one of the individuals who have eventually come under an organization is the ICWEA. They help a number of ladies within the country and girls. And Beatrice, perhaps you can have this conversation with us. What work is ICWEA doing at this point in time?
Oh, thank you, Rita. When it comes to ending violence against women and girls, ICWEA, I should say, appreciates human rights, and it's because of the human rights that ICWEA takes particular interest and emphasis on ending issues of violence against women and girls. And in relation to violence against women and girls, ICWEA is supported by the United Nations Women, UN Women, and the African Women's Development Fund to address this vice, especially in the communities. And so by far, how far have we come? Earlier on, we talked about empowerment. One of the things we've realized is that this particular individual who is undergoing the violence, this particular woman or girl, many of them do not have the information, especially in relation to their human rights. What is their right to health? What is my right as a woman? What is my right as a girl? That information is not there. So basically what we've done is actually doing the GEWE, which is Gender Equality and Women Empowerment Program, which looks at how do we empower these girls with knowledge and information in relation to their reproductive rights, their right to health, their human rights. And in these empowerment programs, we are telling that girl and woman, look here, because you're a woman or because you're a woman living with HIV, let no brother-in-law of yours tell you, you infected my brother, and because he is gone, you do not have entitlements to whatsoever he owned. Because we have those cases where women are actually losing property as a result of either their HIV status or by virtue of being a woman. So we are empowering women to know their right. As a girl, we are telling these girls, you have a right to reproductive health services and information, and we are telling them, as a girl, reproduction means A, B, C, D, and because of that, you have a right to what we call bodily autonomy and integrity. So let no man come and play around with your body. You have a right to say no, and you have a right to say yes. So basically we give women that information in relation to their rights. And then we have done an assessment in relation to gender-based violence and violence in general. And in those assessments, we're actually looking out for whether women actually report cases of violence. And if they do, where do they report to? And if they report, where is the existing evidence and documentation in relation to the cases that have been reported?
What have your assessments found?
So our assessments have found that actually one of them, just as I pointed out last week, most of the cases die a silent death, and one of the reasons was absence of witnesses, and then facilitation to appear in court, and then issues of power, and an individual or a victim does not have actually the money to facilitate the processes, so is actually left helpless. So that is one of them, one of the findings. And another finding from our assessments is that the structures actually do not, the structures in terms of GBV response do not, the pathway is not so clear. Somewhere, somehow, there is a break. So as government, Dr. Daniel will tell you that in terms of GBV response, we have mechanisms in place, and then we have a pathway of how the case is actually brought forth, how it is reported, how it is followed up, and how referrals are made to the different points of contact for redress. But somewhere, somehow, you find there is that pathway is broken. It's not straight. So, so basically, I'll highlight those two, and then what else we have done in terms of ending violence against women and girls is, in terms of the, other than the empowerment programs, we have tried to make sure that the world actually gets to know that violence does exist, and it is real, and the people who are suffering it are the women and girls. And one way we have done that is by appreciating the international frameworks, looking at the Convention on the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls, and how every year in November, countries commemorate that day of ending violence against women and girls, and then they have all this, the 16 days of activism, how women rally behind one another and they talk about violence for all those 16 days, and then they crown it off with the 10th of December, the Human Rights Day. So during that time, we get women out there, they spend time to talk about violence, share their experiences, and we've documented some of the voices of the women talking about violence. So basically, that is one way we have actually empowered and made them to understand and to hear, or to speak out, or to share information about violence against women and girls.
Well, Beatrice, there's a new wave that ICWEA has shown in terms of their reports, one being about forced sterilization when it comes to women living with HIV and AIDS, a new wave of violence that not many might know of. So tell us about what you have found out.
So earlier on, Dr. Dan had said one of the gaps in terms of the response to violence against women and girls is the lack of data. And ICWEA, being a women's-led organization for and by women living with HIV, has a lot of experience in terms of the voices and the lives, what happens in the actual lives of the women living with HIV. So, in terms of, because of that experience, there was realization that women are actually dying silently with certain pertinent issues when it comes to particular violence that touches their status. So, and that is the forced and coerced sterilization of women living with HIV. What does that mean for the viewers out there? From the assessment that was done by ICWEA, which was the sole purpose was to actually make the world understand that a woman living with HIV is undergoing forced and coerced sterilization, by speaking to the women who have actually undergone through this form of violence, and then making the data available. And the findings were that because a woman is living with HIV, when they go to the facilities to seek for healthcare services, there is tendency of the program, the setting provides that we have health talks, education talks, then we have counseling sessions or psychosocial support. But many times you find that in the process of having those talks, or even in the process of having what we call informed consent, where a doctor or a health worker or a clinical officer is supposed to tell me as a woman living with HIV that probably this is how you should behave, or this is how you should protect yourself, and if your partner is negative, this is how you should protect your partner. If you're going to have a baby, this is how you should act. This is the number of clinic visits you should make, and you should deliver in a health facility. Many times that is overlooked, and at the expense of the fact that a woman living with HIV does not have that immunity to support her to have a child, or is not going to be able to support this child, or even will give birth to a child that is HIV positive. So you find that the elements of informed consent are overlooked, and then decision is taken for this woman to actually take a stand on whether she will have more children. So you find at the end of the day, you are actually being convinced to have forced removal of your tubes so that you cannot conceive any further. And that has been violence that is happening among women living with HIV. Some cannot speak. Others have come out because of the assessment and have spoken out. And it comes back to us as programmers, as civil society, as policy makers.
And that's when we bring in Dr. Dan to tell us.
And as ministry, that this is actually happening, and women are dying out there silently with forced and coerced sterilization.
So, Doctor, because we're running out of time, I just want you to make your remarks on what she has mentioned when it comes to forced or coerced sterilization.
Thank you. I think forced sterilization are random acts of, unethical behavior. There is no policy. We don't have a policy. Actually, one of the reasons why we put people on HIV treatment is so that they can go back and live normal lives. Those who want to have children, have them. Those who want to get back to their jobs, have them. So sterilization is not really, HIV infection is not an indication for sterilization. And it's not part of our PMTCT program. So it's an unfortunate unethical behavior. But I must add that by the time a doctor takes somebody to theater, there are certain indications for why a doctor ends up taking a pregnant woman to theater. And when you have opened the abdomen, sometimes you find certain things that demand that you must tie the tubes. Somebody with a ruptured uterus, it's ruptured from behind. The teaching is that you tie the tubes. But now, fortunately, the woman is awake. Nowadays, you don't put them to sleep. You can let them know. But it would be dangerous to the woman if you rupture tubes. But those are few cases which should not be linked to HIV infection. So those could have been unfortunate acts of unethical behavior.
Okay. Now, as we wind this up, I just want all of you to mention one particular area of people who need to be a part of this movement, and that is the male. Now, a number of times they say, no, we don't seem to be put into this conversation, or we are talked about from afar, or simply talked about as perpetrators. But how should men be a part of this movement? Where can they start from? And Dora, I'll start with you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Rita. Men are critical actors. I think it starts with them and ends with a man, because the key message, as I mentioned earlier, it takes everyone, everywhere, at every station to end violence against women. So yes, it is the boys and the men that are responsible for the violence, but it's going to be the men and the boys that are going to model positive behavior that will enable the end of violence against women. And thanks indeed to the movement that is building from different corners, there is lots of work that is going on to mobilize men to be the active champions to end violence against women. at different levels, in different places, we have men that care for this subject. You have seen how Dr. Dan discusses the subject. People who are empathetic and really believe that violence shouldn't thrive just because men are using their power, their authority to really condense and violate rights. So I totally agree to the notion that men are critical. They need to be brought on the table, and the movement building is going to ensure that men are targeted and men are brought on table. So when men are brought on table, it is going to not be take the women's space in this conversation, but say we are critical actors. Let us stand together and speak together. Earlier on, Beatrice mentioned that everybody is affected by violence. Even the men are not happy. When you're in a home where violence is thriving, even the men and the boys are saddened. Actually, the message that you asked earlier on, key messages, a violence-free home is very beneficial to both men and women. Men produce more and do better when they are not experiencing violence. Women thrive and are able to do much more when they are respected and there is less violence. So the violence conversation, the movement building, the taking action is not a sphere of women. A man who has left a woman home happy is looking forward to going home when they know that there is no flexing. The children of a particular household will go to school and thrive when they didn't stay the whole night awake. The money that is spent in hospitals would develop a home to go to another level instead of treating wounds. The shame and the lack of confidence that a family that's experiencing violence gets in a community puts them down. So we are all better off as a community when we have violence-free homes, communities, workplaces, spheres. So let's make our spaces safe for both. When you do it for a woman, you've made it for everybody. So it is critical that everybody is brought on board. It is critical that men do not take the defensive part of like, you women, the women of today, Museveni's women. No, everybody has a stake in this. Let us define the problem and mention that it is the men. But in defining, let us not shame and let the men feel like they are already judged, so they have nothing to do. That would be a very wrong message to put through. But men are critical actors. They are the ones who would actually change this sphere. And thank goodness the men who are out there in different places, the different leaders that are using their platforms to call against the changing violence against women. And because women, the men, they occupy the spaces of power. They are the leaders, they are the heads of departments, they appropriate budgets. We've talked about forced sterilization of women. This is structural violence where the people who know are making decisions without consultation, without seeking the choice of a woman or seeking their voice. So everybody that has power to harm or to create a vice, if their attitude and their mind and their thinking could be engaged, the same men would end up having different products of where their power is asserted. So we need everybody at all levels, men of different colors, to join the fight against violence against women.
Okay, now as we speak about the fight against violence against women and girls, you can also, if you want to be a part of that conversation, if you want to advocate for this in terms of this movement, there's a number at the bottom of the screen and you can be able to reach out for more information or also to join the movement. But as we listen to the last submission from a gentleman, as you talk about the men, Dr. briefly, in about 2 minutes, could you just talk about male participation in this movement and why they need to be a part of it?
Thank you. I think men are already part of this movement by them accepting to come and participate in this.
Yes.
They are part of this movement, and as I've observed in the various fora and various meetings, many men are already part of this movement, which is good. But the number needs to be big. We need men at the grassroots. Because really, if we are talking about violence against women, really the violence against women is often the perpetrators are men. And they are perpetrators partly because they are ignorant. That is the culture they have grown up in. That is the norms that have been defined. And even if we are going to change, I've said we need to introduce new words, new vocabulary, new norms, new attitudes. We must engage men if we are going to get. We cannot deal with the girls alone. The men must come on board. Now that brings me to one of my last remarks. As I was thinking, I saw that we have an opportunity, a new generation of men. Recently, when the COVID lockdown came into force, we conducted a survey in the communities. Children have come back from school, they are locked up with their parents in their homes. We asked these children, girls, did you get any information, any guidance about HIV prevention, about living responsibly from your father or mother? Most of them said no. So the parents never have these conversations. If we are going to breed a new generation of men who have different words, different attitudes, we are going to rely on schools. We have come up with what we call a sexuality education framework. It is currently, because it's called sexuality, people think sexuality and sex mean the same thing, but they don't mean the same thing. It's currently not taking off as we would want. It is the tool. I have read it as a father, as a family man, as a scientist. It's an appropriate tool that I would allow my child to be subjected to. Accurate information passed on to young men and women so that we change the vocabulary of young people. Because the old people I know, most of them, will be difficult to change. But if we target the young generation, change their vocabulary, change their interpretation of things, change their power, interpretation of how much power they have over each other, we shall end this vice of violence against girls. So I call upon all stakeholders, support the sexuality framework, let it be rolled out without delay across the whole country.
All right, well, thank you so much, Dr. Dan. Our conversation this evening was how we can all together rise to end violence against women and girls, taking a look at a movement that is not in any way held by gender, in any way held by age, religion, or any other holdings, but just simply one thing that unites us, and that is a way of ending violence against women and girls. Now, our conversation, the panelists this evening were Beatrice Ajonye, who is a project coordinator of ICWEA. Thank you so much for joining us. And next to her is Dora Chichoncho Musingu, who is the Executive Director of Uganet. And the man joining us on this panel was Dr. Dan Byamukama, who is the Head of HIV Prevention at the Uganda AIDS Commission. Thank you so much for joining us. We all have a part to play in ending violence against women and girls, and I hope you have taken something from this conversation. I am Rita Kanyar, and have a good evening. Thank you.